What is up, guys? Welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Science Podcast. We have
Yes.
teams of scientists working around the clock that have scientifically proven we are, in fact, the number one podcast. And don't take my word for it. Like, we pay them, they work 24 hours. So we're paying them good money. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button already, make sure you do so. Today, I'm here with possibly the biggest guest ever we've ever had on the podcast. We're here with Steafan Fox, aka Uberboyo, aka son of Megan Fox. She's related,
Uh,
isn't she?
damn. I,
Is she
I
not
hope she's
related?
not. I hope she's not, because
Why not?
that puts me in a very, very bad position in terms of my desires. Let's put it that way. I'd be very, very disappointed if we were related, but I think we might be. Like, to be
You'd
honest,
be
she has the
disappointed.
well,
Okay,
like
right.
she's beautiful. I'd love if one day I could meet her, and then perhaps. But I don't know. It's a bit incestual, so I don't know. That's always an awful serious bone of contention with me, because
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I can't. It can't happen. It can't happen. So.
Okay, Stefan. So I'm just gonna get you to say. So first, I'll outline what we're gonna be talking about today. We're gonna be talking about. It's gonna be psychology, and mainly it's going to be Jungian psychology. So we might
Yes.
touch on other things, but it's mainly going to be Jungian psychology. So we'll see how that goes. How about you just introduce yourself first? Give us your background, credentials, if you have any. If you don't have, it's fine. I don't have any either.
Hello, people. So the only thing I've got is the horsepower of my boyo mind. I dropped out of college because I got sick of the nonsense going on in there, and I started. I was a musician for a long time, still am. I'm actually pumping up music on the channel these days. If you want to go over and check it out, it's Uberboyo.
Are you actually
Pop over there, and
pumping music out?
yeah, there's music on the channel
Happy
as
days.
well. And then I'm also doing a little bit of talk about Jung and Nietzsche. I always got into, obviously, being an artist, you want to have good, solid philosophical foundations. You want to have good, solid intellectual stuff to think about, big picture things to think about. So Jung, obviously, rewarding the idea of the dreams was always something that attracted me, because he gives that's a very, very potent thing for an artist. All artists throughout histories have taken some level of inspiration from the dream world. And of course, Nietzsche is the most dazzling, brilliant writer that you've seen in the last in that field, which is philosophy, that you've seen in the last 500, 1,000 years. I'd say he is really, really top level, and he has a very, very good take on what art is, and the correct attitude towards a creator and what it means to be a creator. And so my channel is usually just discussing their ideas from that context and putting out my own stuff from my context, and generally being a juicy effing boyo.
You didn't have to say that. We could tell just from taking one look at you. You're juicy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Right. So do you want to get into the questions?
Fire it right ahead, man.
Let's
Go
get into it.
crazy.
How is it taught? Here, actually, do you want to do a quick outline of the Jungian archetypes, the five main archetypes first, or do you want me? Do you want me to
Quick,
try?
quick, quick
Yeah,
outline.
I know it's gonna be hard, right?
Well, no, go into the questions, and I'll be able. Look, all right. If you want me to if you want for this, I'll give you a quick outline of those, if that's
For
what you want to
free.
focus this on. Basically, the idea that most people get going into Jung is that they want to develop their character. They want to achieve divine juiciness. They want to evolve. They want to take themselves to a higher level. And so the problem is that basically it's a thesis that your mind is not perfect the way it is. A video I'm actually preparing right now is this idea that when I got my first fight, I was helicopter punching, like big arms like this, chin up. And by the time you learn to fight, you have your chin down and your hands up, and it's evidence that our instinctive way is okay but not perfect, and you need to actually take it to a higher level. And so Jung is a very, very similar idea. Like, naturally we helicopter punch. You meet people and you'll notice that they tend to lie to themselves. People tend to be extremely self-deceptive. Like, I'm the same. We're all the same. It's a serious problem with being human, is that we will ignore reality. We'll ignore the truth. We'll delude ourselves. We'll keep saying to ourselves we're doing the right thing. We're the good person, as like in a myriad of different ways. We always rationalize to ourselves. One example is, for example, you might have a nation that was like just bombing people all over the place and telling themselves they're doing it for a just cause, or the Christians, for example, going out to do their crusades, doing it for a good cause, for the God of love. The same with Muslims. They're taking over the world for love and all this stuff, and that seems like a lie. And then flip side, you have people who are like lower, you know, they're not, they're lazy, they're not engaging with life and all this, and they look up at the people who are winning and they say those people are evil and I hate those people are bad, those people taking over the world, they're evil and I'm the good person, simply because I don't want to admit to myself that they're better than me. Or it's just like the evil people on top don't want to admit that they're bad, these type of things. And so we have this propensity towards deception, delusion, and lying. And Jung would suggest that in order for you to develop your character, you need to work against this tendency in these natures in order to improve yourself. Nietzsche does the exact same thing. And so something like the shadow is the first step there. It's like, how do I deceive myself? How do I lie to myself? Those things there that I project negativity on, how could they be in some sense a revelation to me of my own inadequacies? For example, you have the elite evil people that you're like, oh, they're so bad and naughty, and it's like, well, how can that be how would I look at them and say, maybe I am only hate them because I'm not putting in enough work to be a bit more like them, things like this. And there's a variety of ways you can do this in all sorts of different directions. And it's that's the reason why it would be considered an archetype, is that it matters less about, oh, is it the evil people or is it the poor people that's your shadow? It's more that there probably will be something that you're projecting a psychological energy on, negativity, if you will, or hate or envy or resentment. And you can inspect that and actually find wisdom in that. And that would be the first archetype that most people, quote unquote, encounter. And Jung would say that if you encounter that for long enough, eventually you'll start to pull away the curtains of your deceptions and start to see that, for example, you have an animating force, a thing that's driving you. If you pull away your deceptions, you'll eventually see that a lot of what you're doing is intent on sex, pretty much. You just want to procreate. You're driven by your will to life, if you will. This is what Schopenhauer realized as well. You pull away all these deceptions and all this, and you realize that perhaps, for example, you only hate the rich people because that gives you status. So you can sit around with like the girls and be like, oh, those evil rich people, those people on top, they're so crap. And then everybody's like, yeah, they are crap. And then you have status in your community, and then you get the girl and all that. And you'll start to see that like the vast majority of what you do is driven by this animus. Animus literally means animating force. It's a Roman Latin word. And then that would be, you start digging down to that archetype, realizing like how much of what you do is motivated by this energy. And this is where Freud stopped. Freud was like, yep, there you go, life figured out, there you go, everything's about sex, everything's all crazy and bad. And then after a while, you even pull apart that stuff, and you start to see, oh my god, there's there's actually something more profound. It's almost like this will to life is subservient to something even higher. Like, for example, why would Leonidas in 300 die and give up his will to life in order to protect Sparta? And it's like there's something bigger there. There's something so big that it's difficult for our souls to comprehend. But we know when we watch Leonidas sacrifice his life for Sparta, you realize, oh my God, there is something great. There is something noble and powerful and divine about life that's beyond just like, I want to nut in all the girls. And
I actually
you're
want to
willing
get into that later into the podcast. Don't mean to stop you, but I want to get into this idea of meaning and why so many people are struggling to find it. We can get into that in a bit. So
we can. That's a bit of
anyway, I
a nut to
interrupted.
crack. But that's basically like the thesis then, is that eventually you'll reach a level, you pull back your self-deceptions, you'll find that you're driven by sex, you'll think that's all it is, you pull back the deception of that, the delusion of that, the lie of the animus or anima, if you will, and you'll start to see that at the very highest level, there are very big, profound things that you want to engage in. You want to have this like glorious life purpose. There are things that are bigger than life in some sense, or more audacious than I guess you could say are more base instincts or something like that, and that becomes your like great quest for meaning. And so religious people, like, this is where you'll get these religious people who give up on life altogether. They're like, oh, sex is evil, chastity is the way forward. And then they go and they do mandalas in a monastery for the rest of their life, and they focus on God. Or you'll find the warrior who is able to sacrifice his ability to ever be with his wife again, to even be alive. He'll sacrifice his life in order to defend something greater than himself, such as Rome or your nation or something like that. And so we start to lift ourselves up to these higher things. In some sense, you can't access the higher until you take these steps. It is something you necessarily have to do, move from lower to higher. And so you'll have this problem where Some people will want to skip steps, where they'll go in and be like, I'm a noble warrior of anarchism or communism or the right-wing ideology or whatever it is. Like you'll get caught up in something because you're looking for that very highest thing, but you're not taking the correct steps through it, where you're just like, all right, just make sure you're not deceiving yourself a little bit here, bro. Make sure you've got perhaps everything in order. And so Jung would generally call this individuation, figuring out through walking through these steps how you decide who you are as an individual, where you fit into the big picture. And that would be my elevator pitch of Jungian psychology.
Nice, thank you. I'm gonna give a very, very short, brief outline of the Jungian archetypes, just in case, because it's probably not going to make sense. I assume there's many people who will have no idea what we're on about. Like you said shadow a few times. I'm
Yes.
guessing that unless you're interested in Jungian psychology, you might not already know what that is. So there's 5 main Jungian archetypes. There's the ego, the shadow, the persona, the anima or animus, and then the self. So the ego is basically anything you're conscious of. The shadow is anything that you've repressed, in essence. The anima or animus is anything that you've repressed that is, and I'm going to ask you more questions about this, that would be considered contrasexual. So if you're a man, that would be anything you've repressed that is feminine, and then if you're a woman, it would be anything that you've repressed that is masculine. Then you have the persona, which is just, the social mask you wear when you meet people. It's the face you're showing to the world. And then the self, which I have lots of questions about, is I'm actually not sure what it is, to be honest. It's probably it's all of you together. Would I be right in saying that? It's we can get into it. Yeah, we can get into it. I have loads of questions on it. Do you want to?
You go right ahead. Go on, tear into it, because these are complicated topics. So I think it's better to just.
I think I'll go with the questions about. I've questions about the shadow first, and then we can get into the self. Those are kind of near the end.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fine? Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Right. So, how is a thought memory put into the shadow? Is it subconscious, or always conscious, or conscious at first, then it becomes a habit?
So how is a
thought or anything? How is anything put into the shadow, just in general? Like,
yeah, okay. So my understanding of it, and bear in mind that I have a very, very, very unique take. Like I don't diligently follow Jung. I like look at what he says and try to interpret it for myself.
Yeah.
So as I was saying there at the start, we have this propensity towards deception, and it seems like there's a part of our mind that is able to detect that deception. It's, if you want to think about it in a scientific way, we have a left brain and a right brain. And so the left brain, literally, when you analyze it, has this propensity towards delusion. It tends to make things small and focus so that it can take action in the world. Whereas the right brain has this wiser, bigger picture. The metaphor I'm using is Luke Skywalker is almost like the left brain, and Yoda is like the right brain. He has wisdom, but he knows that it's about letting the left brain do his thing. And so the left brain is your ego, if you want to think about it this way. And that's that little telescope of focus that you have, whereas the right brain is paying attention to the whole world. And this is literally how it works. So you can look at the science in this. Ian McGilchrist, if you want to look him up. And what happens is, obviously, Yoda knows that Luke Skywalker needs to be humbled every now and again. Luke Skywalker needs to be aware that despite the fact that he is like, really good with the lightsaber and all that, he needs to realize that he's not the best. There's always someone better. It's like, you learn to fight in your local gym, you beat everybody, and suddenly you start thinking, I can be Conor McGregor. And then Yoda has to say, trust me, my man, Conor McGregor would smash you, but you get inflate, your ego inflates because you have no context, you can't see the bigger picture. And so Yoda, the right brain, would obviously start to serve to you experiences or feelings or desires or something like that would imply to you that you're not as big as you think you are. So your envy towards Conor McGregor could be an example of that. Like Yoda might say, you're envious of Conor McGregor because he's definitely better than you. Like there's something to that. Inspect that relationship. You're not comfortable with yourself. You're kind of stuck in this little ego thing, and you're looking at Connor with envy and even resentment and whatnot. Or maybe around the gym, like you kind of bully the weak guys, like the kind of new kids coming in. You're trying to build up your ego, and so you're really hurting the weak guys. Like your attitude, your relationship to them is very, 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 very pathological, negative. It's like, why are you kicking the shit out of the little young teens coming in here? It's kind of weird. It's like the gorilla, like thinking he's class, the big fish in the small pond type thing. And so Yoda would be like, all of these are, for example, a shadow experience. All of these little behaviors are evidence of, shall we say, the archetype in action. So what we would be doing here is you will have these things that you're doing that are deceptive, delusional, like I guess you could say negative, a symptom of you being a little bit arrogant or stuck in your ego, stuck in your head, stuck in your little prison of thoughts. And something like the shadow would be a category you put on these behaviors in order to break free of them, to overcome them, to actually, maybe even better, detect them and have the correct relationship to them. So for example, your envy is something that you will naturally just go with. I hate Conor McGregor. And then if you have an understanding what shadow work is, you would say, wait a second, my hate for Conor McGregor might be secretly admiration. And so that's sort of the way I'd understand it, is that you categorize these very negative emotions, if you will, and then just start to ask yourself more intelligent questions about them. Stop being bluntly like just letting the emotion decide what's going on with you, and start to inspect them more. So when you're framing it as, is there content inside the shadow? I've never quite found that a good way to phrase it. I'm not sure if I like that way of phrasing it, because it implies that the shadow is like this thing out here, outside of me, or something like that. It could be. Like, I don't know everything. I don't know everything about this stuff. Jung could have meant it that way, but this is the way I look at it. I look at it as more like a tool for detecting problems. It's like the way a doctor would diagnose symptoms, that type of thing.
Yeah, so I'm saying, if I repress certain thoughts, like say I get a thought like I get angry, I want to punch someone, and I repress that, how exactly is that happening? Like, am I conscious of it initially, and then I get rid of it, or does it start off as something I'm doing consciously? I'm like, no, I'm a good person. I didn't want to punch that guy. No, I'm a good person, right? And then eventually it becomes a habit, or like, is the shadow always, in a sense, superficial? Is it always, are you always like able to see it in your mind, but you're kind of just ignoring it?
I think it's a little bit of a combination of both. From my experience, like what you just described there, you get angry at someone and you kind of push it back. So someone will piss you off. This is even the left brain, right brain thing is actually an interesting way of explaining this, is that the right brain sort of sees reality and experiences the fullness of reality. Left brain is like a little telescope, and the left brain will like talk a lot. It will like rationally explain what's happening all the time, and it'll usually be wrong. Like, it'll be delusional, just simply. And so when someone says something to you and you'll be like, oh, what a bastard, like he's insulting me, or he's putting me down, or blah, 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 blah. You'll just have this like narrative of what's after happening. But secretly, what actually happened is they wounded your pride, and you're kind of upset that people in your community don't respect you or something like that. And that might be related to the fact that you actually are a bit ashamed of the fact that you've been lazy or something like that. And there might be this big web of problems that are going into it, and it's kind of goes underneath the radar, if you will. It goes underneath the way you're thinking, your head and whatnot. And so I think what you're asking is like, how does stuff get put in the shadow? It would be something like that. It would be like you're just, your experience in life, and your quote unquote your ego is just walking around there and chattering away, explaining to yourself what's happening, but it's just fundamentally wrong. There's a whole richer, deep understanding of what's happening that you're just not accessing, pretty much. And it's about saying, right, how do I access that unconscious, that right brain, that other interpretation of the world? But you could even say the truth or something like that. Follow?
Yep, perfect. A lot of these questions are related, so I just want to see something that you did. That's not really important. It's something that you dig out of your shadow, still technically your shadow after you realize it. We don't have to get into these very technical questions if you don't want. I have much
So
I've
wait, I'll
other.
try answer it. I would just warn, like my whole thing is anti-jargonism, and so these are asking questions about a concept. Are we sure we're
My whole
conceptualizing the
thing is
concept? Or
jargonism. I love jargon.
so this is it. So like when we were saying the shadow, it's almost like the way you're framing it is like it's like a storage space inside your head. Are you sure that's the correct way to frame it? And that's sort of what I'd be asking people is like, right, if you're getting into Jungian psychology and you're going to be saying, all right, what is the shadow? Like, are you saying to yourself like it's like a hard drive plugged into the back of your head, or is it like something outside of your mind or something like that? And that's always been a very very hard thing in the field, because a lot of people just decide what it is themselves, and they say, all right, this is what I think the shadow is, and then people tend to be talking past each other a lot. And so I would go with the left brain right brain because it's convenient, because it's at least scientifically verified there's something going on here. And so if we're talking about the shadow and you say, is it something separate? Like, what do you mean by that? What are
I
you
just
thinking there?
mean, so there's things in your shadow, and eventually you're gonna realize them through individuation or whatever, however method you use to realize them. Would
Yes.
is
So
that
could I
still
ask a
technical?
question here?
Yeah, go on.
Why do you use the preposition in? Like in the shadow? Is that like, where is it? Is like a hard drive? Like, where is it?
I could be wrong about it. Yeah, so I consider
I'm
it
not
to
saying you're
be.
wrong. I'm just asking.
Yeah, because I consider things to be in the shadow, and then you would bring them out of it.
Yeah. So that's really my question here is maybe less so about like let's do it like some thinking exercises here for a second. When you say in the shadow, you're implying a entire, I guess you could say, thesis about what the shadow is. It's like a place. Are you sure that's correct? Like, I would be proposing that the shadow is a lot closer to like a sort of a way of categorizing things. I know that sounds a little bit, what the fuck are you talking about, Steph? But it is that idea of the way I see humans actually working from the science around this stuff as well, is that we tend to detect our world and then ascribe emotions to things. It's like, I hate this, I love this, I dislike this, blah, blah, blah. It's a very blunt way of doing things. And something like your resentment, your hate, your envy of people, you could categorize that as a quote unquote shadow projection, if you will. And the shadow as like a space, is it some unified thing? I'm not really sure about that. It seems more like the beep that happens in the radar, if you know what I mean. That's the way I understand it. I don't know, is it like a personification? Now some Jungians say it is. Like, I'm not like saying you're wrong here. Like, this is the way I understand it. Some Jungians say that what happens is you store a lot of stuff in your unconscious, and that becomes your like negative shadow or something like that, and then it becomes this like beast that you have to go and face and conquer. And there most certainly could be something to that, and I'm not quite sure how you would conceptualize that. Is that like, I don't know, your unconscious memory, and what happens is every time you have a negative experience, there's this like character back there that gets charged with some of that negative experience and then swells up into this like monster. And then if you keep on going through the world and people keep on insulting you and you never stand up for yourself, all that negative experience will like charge into this creature in the back of your mind, the dark beast, and then
You
suddenly
you
one
don't
day you'll just snap like Joker.
you don't think it is that. You think it's just a method of classification. It's a way of classifying.
I think it could be the second one. I just haven't figured out any way to neurologically
I thought it was
code it for
definite.
me.
I thought it was just literally anything you've repressed is your shadow. Like, I didn't
Yeah,
know there
so
was so
so
much uncertainty.
I don't know. Like, Jung proposed something akin to both of what I just said there. Like, shadow
Okay.
projection was the first thing. The second one was like what he would consider the process. But a lot of people are like, that's just absolute pseudoscience nonsense. Like, you can't just make up notions about this. I think the theory of the left brain and the right brain gives actually a lot of credence to this thesis, but I'm still a little bit tentative about talking about it as like a space. The shot. Do you get what I'm saying here? It's like, I'm not too sure how to correctly conceptualize that. So I will explain it with people. I say this is how it could work, but the only thing I'm somewhat certain of is that sort of notion of shadow projection. It does seem to happen. There does seem to be at least a decent scientific thesis underneath it that you could roll with. but in terms of like it being a space, like a hard drive and all that, maybe like the back of your mind, whatever that means, like, you know, and it does sort of make sense in terms of intuition, but how does that actually work neurologically? That's really up in the air and up for question, you know.
Yeah,
That's a very,
I
very
feel like
serious
that would
thing.
be weird if it was its own space. I think it's just
Exactly what I'm getting at.
yeah, yeah,
That's exactly what I'm getting at. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's just it's gonna be it's anything that's unconscious that's been made unconscious by you that you've
And
actively
so
made unconscious.
yes, there's the questions like where's the unconscious? Like what is the unconscious? What happens? Like something happens to your experience, and like, you know, you say to me, you're like, I don't like your jumper, and I'm really angry about that, but obviously my ego is like, be polite, so I'm like, oh well, AJ, thank you. And then what happens? Does the real emotion that I actually felt go go into my body? I think there is something to that. I think that's genuinely like what happens. You kind of like put on the fake smile, and then secretly deep down you store the pain, like the
You
anger,
think you build it
the
up?
something like that. It
Yeah.
seems like we do store it like sub ego, if you will. But describing that is kind of tough. Like, and I'm sort of speaking this way because we're on the science podcast, but like if you like any scientist you ever go to with this stuff, they'll just scoff at it, because if you're like the shadow, they're like, what the fuck are you talking about, my man? And so when you're like speaking to people in this type of facility, kind of getting the unconscious clear, getting the shadow clear, very, very hard. It's very, very hard stuff to do. The
Would you
best
not
I
say
found
that?
is,
Go on, good Jonah.
well, just the best I found is left brain, right brain. I can't really see anything else. Maybe you could say something like, you know, your memory or something like that, like your stored memories. You store stuff in your nervous system in your body. Like there's a lot of stuff that has to go into this, and it's very interesting topic. Like I'm not really
Yeah,
leaning either
yeah,
side of the
okay.
fence. I know for certain, for example, what I said at the start, shadow projection and your ability to work with that is very, very, very intuitively clear, and does tend to work with people, and is a lot more useful than saying, oh, where is the shadow? What is the shadow? That stuff is actually just more rewards your intellect for thinking about it. But what tends to get results with people is actually just this kind of blunt idea of, if you envy Conor McGregor, inspect that envy. You know what I mean? Like that's very procedural and quite useful in that sense.
Yeah. The reason I ask about it is just to know the best way to integrate it. Like, because if I don't know exactly how I'm putting stuff into shadow, am I even putting stuff into the shadow? You know, so if you don't know the mechanics, the physics of it, you're gonna not be very you're not gonna be very good at kind of integrating it. So
Yes, I absolutely get what you're saying, and I would disagree a little bit, because from my experience, you don't need to know what's going on to use it. Like, I just don't think you do.
you think you
If
just need
you're a
to be aware of it.
sort of, you just need to know the process at the most. Knowing the physics of it is good, but my God, brother, like most people don't know like, I don't think anybody knows the physics of this. I don't think like anybody apart from Young knew what the hell he was really talking about. Like, as I said, there's a serious problem. It's like when you say the shadow, where is this thing? Like, where does it go? You know, and so you could go crazy in an academic setting trying to figure out where it is. But then when I'm talking to people, like people come to my stuff and they're like Young and all this stuff, and I'm talking to people about it, and I'm like, here, just focus on the procedural side of it, because it does get results. Like, people will, guaranteed, they will be looking at people with like hate and resentment and envy and ideas. They'll have this like this a lot of arrogance and pride wrapped up in a certain set of ideas. And when you challenge them to like let go of those ideas, or Steelman, you know, like say, how is this person you're envious of actually good? Like, imagine the way that they're good and all that. It does actually just, quote unquote, reframe some of their thoughts, and actually can be very, very helpful with people. But explaining to them that what you've got a like something, a place, a hard drive in your back of your mind. I've never find that useful. You know, it just makes people think about it more, but not
Yeah.
do it. You get what I'm saying? And again, that's an issue with stuff like Jungian psychology and all this, is that those categories are not properly defined. They're not scientifically defined. And so a lot of people will just decide what they want it to be and not actually like put the fail test of science and falsification on it. Take, for example, Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson almost never has this discussion, but he talks about stuff like the shadow in a procedural way.
You think it's because it's not well defined?
It would just be an awful rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah.
It's like, what is the shadow? Who takes priority here? Like the scientific consensus or Jung's theory? How do we match the two? As I said, the left brain and right brain theory is probably the closest I've seen to something that's valid, and that actually says Jung is correct. And it just seems better than like the shadow is like an astral hard drive or something like that. So I guess more than anything, since this is the science podcast, you can see the problems with this and how you have to be very, very careful when you're working in these.
We're gonna have to ditch this whole interview, man. I'm sorry, this is just not up to par. Right.
No, not at all, not at all. Like this is like, you know, you want to have something for good intellectual discussion on these things. Like I think this is a brilliant angle to take at things, is that like people come into these spheres and they'll get entranced by the ideas, they'll get entranced by the quote unquote the jargon, but they won't inspect and ask seriously hard questions about, all right, how does this fit? Like what is Jung trying to say here? And versus, well, how do we update this? How do we bring this to the modern understanding of things, you know?
Yeah.
I think a lot of Jungians could do with paying attention to that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I'm serious. Like there's,
yeah,
like you see some of the stuff that they're saying. You're like, how? Like it's just like jargon, and there's no.
It kind of does seem like that. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, and I'd have a crusade against that. But see, most Jungians wouldn't like me. That's the other side of it. So, anyway, sir.
No worries.
What else are you thinking?
Is the anima not just a subset of your shadow?
Oh Jesus! So again, like that's the sort of idea of the shadow is this thing, and the anima is like the subset of
other
it.
Thing.
Like what do we mean? What do we mean by anima? What do we mean by the shadow and all this? Like the way I understand the anima is like we've all got an instinct, a sub-rational instinct to survive, or to actually, it's probably more closer to thrive. Freud called it the libido. Nietzsche called it the Willst zur der Macht. And Schopenhauer called it the will to struggle, I believe. Darwin called it the will to survive, the struggle for survival. And you look at this is your instincts, basically. And your instincts are smarter than your ego. They're smarter than your head. Your instincts. This is an unbelievably interesting problem. This is the most fascinating problem of all. If you take this computer model and put in like some robot that's seeking the reality of the computer model, the truth, versus a robot that's just wants to survive, the robot that's seeking the truth will die off, whereas the one that wants to survive will survive. It will evolve, even if it lies. And so there's this thing about reality where knowing what's true is not as valuable in terms of winning.
Do you know Donald Hoffman?
I do not know Donald.
He has a whole thing about that. I actually want to have him on the podcast.
Get him on and talk to him about the Animus if you wish. But that's really what I'm getting at here, is that it's evidently true that a delusion that works is better than the truth. And that's a frightening idea. That's an absolutely frightening idea, because that means that our whole pursuit of reality is truth, as we understand it, might be misguided in some sense. If we figure out the truth of the universe, and it turns out that it was pointless, it was about living as opposed to the seeking and all this. And so the personification of that energy that wants to win as opposed to find the truth exists in you. Like, as we said, if you have some delusional nonsense about what you're doing, and you're like full of shadow projections, quote unquote, but you manage to procreate with some girl, you've sort of won in terms of life. And so life is going to push you to do that. life has this thing where it just doesn't care what you think. It doesn't care about your little story, your little ego and all that. It's happy to bully you out of that, like that way of thinking. It's happy to like, you're like, I might talk to you and be like, man, I'm a very good guy. I never fall for girls. I'm always focused on my purpose and all this. And then I haven't seen a girl in a week or something like that. So I get really in my head and I'm like, all right, perfect. I'm in control. And then I walk outside and some girl just walks up to me and she says, I am really like in the mood right now. And I'm like, just about a minute before that, I was being like, I'm a pious guy on my purpose, can't waste my day. But if she just comes up, she's beautiful, she's like a model or something, I'm like it's literally, my head would just turn off and my body would just be like, do it, 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 do it. And you'd get taken over. It's like it would just kick your stupid story out of the way. And then what's so interesting is that your mind will rationalize. It's be like, look, my rule was that I wouldn't get thrown off course by ugly girls or something like that, but this girl's beautiful, or this girl's different. And then when you inspect your experience honestly, like, this is exactly how it works. On the flip side, girls are similar. They'll say, here's the classic one. It's like, I hate bad guys, but I can't stop getting with them. I can't stop having sex with bad guys. And it's like, she might be saying to herself, like, bad guys are bad and I hate them and all this stuff, but she's very, very attracted to them on a fundamental level, probably because they're like highly masculine or something like that. And so we have this propensity for like this ability for our instincts to dominate our minds, and we want to think it's the other way around. We want to think our ego is in control. Our ego is fundamentally not in control.
You're saying, just to clarify, you're saying all of this is in the Anima Animus.
And so what we would call the Anima Animus would be, as far as I understand now, again, remember, I'm very fluid with Jungian stuff. Most Jungians would be like, this guy is a blasphemer.
Trash.
Yeah. And this conception that I'm putting forward here is that instinctive drive towards these specific goals, life, procreation, at the expense of truth, at the expense of your ego, is similar to
so
what
why are they contrasexual though? Why are they necessarily contrasexual? Is just what I'm...
Okay, so think of it this way, like a woman, the thing that gives a woman's life meaning on this level that I'm talking about is a man. The thing that gives a man's life meaning on this level is a woman. And so in order for a woman to get a man, he has to be juicy, he has to be strong. And like, the worst thing that can happen for a woman is like, she can get a weak man. And so in some sense, she has like an inbuilt standard of the type of man she wants. And so when she meets a guy, her instinct to life is demanding that he's strong, handsome, masculine, badass, and all this. And she wants that. She would nearly take him over the nice guy who's got lots of money. She wants just like really healthy genetics. Not she, like her deep instincts want that. And so in her head, she sort of got this set of standards. And when you meet her, she's comparing you to that set of standards. It's like, are you man enough? That's the kind of vibe you get off girls. It's like, are you man enough? Are you like top level juiciest boyo there is? Is that what I'm talking to here? Because I'm nowhere going to go near you little creep if you're not. And it's that type of standard she holds you to. And that's sort of like the Animus. Because when you talk to a girl and she gets really like, she gets really fresh, or she gets really blunt with you and all this, it kind of feels like you're arguing with a dude in a weird way. And then you might treat it like you're talking to a lad and get all like logical and all that, but that's not what's happening at all. She's not trying to have a logical argument. She's trying to compare you to, are you good enough? Like, it's a very unlogical thing. She's trying to see if you're strong. She's not trying to see if you're correct or telling a good scientific thesis. She's trying to see, are you a strong character? Are you able to take rejection? Are you witty? These type of things. And so people get caught up, like they have like Jordan Peterson and Kathy Newman. Like, it's like, Kathy Newman's challenging Jordan Peterson, and it seems like a very, very illogical argument. It's because it sort of has to be. That's the way these dynamics have to work. It's like undercut by something, I guess, Freudian.
Do you feel that
in a very, very
that's
and just
not
briefly,
just human nature in general? Like, that's just trying to win. That's just trying to win an argument. Like,
well,
do you think it's related to the
when two men are trying to win an argument? I don't think it's quite the same dynamic at all. You
like,
think
so?
Yeah, like, I think like when a man and a woman get in an argument in this situation, it's very much like it's trying to like get this like subtle seeing if you're good enough, if you're up to standard. Whereas I think when men get in an argument, there can be a lot more room for it to be a war of logic to prove who's right versus.
But do you think in the context of an interview on TV, that's also happening?
How do you mean?
Like, say if you're meeting a girl in a club or something, you'd be like, yeah, she's gonna check if you're up to par. But like on television, is that also what's going on? You think so? Is it not just her
I'm not too
profession?
sure. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure. But what I think the psychoanalysts like Freud and Jung are proposing, like I'm not too sure. But what I think they're proposing is that subtly underneath all these interactions, these are the dynamics that are at play. That, like, in some sense, I guess you could even say between two men, it's a war for status. It's actually a war to come out looking like, Trump during the election. It wasn't like he was up there talking about policy. He was being like low energy Jeb, I think he was calling them. Like it was a bully status thing. It's like, I'm the alpha male. And then with Jordan Peterson and Caddy, it's like it is like this kind of like, it wasn't a logical argument. It was like, who can one up who can put the other person down, who can get who, that type of thing, who can win, who can beat who. And these would be like these subtle dynamics going on. As far as I understand, this would be the thesis of the Animus and the Anima and the will to life, like participating in us all. We're almost like puppets on the end of life's puppet string, and that's the big scary thing. The Buddhists would call this Maya, and it precedes everything. Like as much as we want to think we're logical, like this is happening all the time everywhere. And there might be a few bubbles where we get people that are logical and focused on the truth, and it's quite rare. And I think if you just seriously think about the state of reality and the world you live in, it seems like that's actually what's going on more than anything.
Right. Do you want to move on to the self?
We've got about like 8 minutes, so I'm not sure if I can riff too much into that.
Okay, we don't have to go on. We can. What is the self, and does the self always truly know?
So again, that's a very, very difficult one for me. Like I don't have a good grip of what Jung might mean.
For me, that's the most interesting one. Like this idea that it's almost, it basically is pseudoscience. But I mean, that the idea that there's a self in you, and he knows exactly what's going on. He's architecting everything, and he just knows all along.
Yeah. So it's a very, very big idea, and as I said, it is hard to pin down because like it's such a claim that you've got this superordinate force.
I want to know how he got to, like, how did he figure all this out? Like, I know he had magical abilities and stuff, but
the reason why I went with the self was he kept on noticing when people would reach a point. So this will to life, this desire for the anima and the animus is like pulling you all sides, trying to get you to nut in girls or prove that you're a big juicy alpha male and all this stuff, or girls are trying to, it's making you get all the bad boys and all this stuff. And the instinct, if you look at the male instinct, like to just look bluntly at what the male instinct is and what it pushes you to do. Like my instinct for sex is asking me for one thing. My instinct to life is saying, have as many children as possible with as many different women as possible, which are as beautiful as possible. And that just becomes like kind of ridiculous after a while. It's like, I want to be King Solomon. I want to literally have like thousands and thousands of wives. Like that's the drive. It knows no limit. It's absolutely crazy. And then at some point that just, it nearly becomes a little bit too ridiculous, perhaps. Like it's almost like there must be something else. Like this is so almost unconscious and blunt and mad. Like there must be a bigger picture to this. There must be a bigger conception to this. Like there must be something a bit bigger than just me. And that's where you start to get this idea of, like, if you want to think this in terms of evolution, of like, all right, maybe I could have all the children in the society, but what about if my nation survives forever because I become chaste, I become a priest, and I discover a scientific revelation or technology that gives my nation, my people, power that will take over the whole world. Like I invent the wheel or something like that, or I invent the chariot. And it's this type of idea. It's like, as much as it would be great for me to procreate with all the girls, imagine if there's like a level higher than that where I could innovate, like change the game for my group, my society, my people on such a high level that it would actually like move my genetics forward for 1,000 years. You start to notice this when people like Roman emperors, they stop talking in terms of just survive day to day, and they start saying stuff like, how could we establish the Roman Empire that would last 1,000 years? These type of things. Like the picture becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And so as far as I understand, like once that will to life gets tamed a little bit, you understand it, you see where it's kind of pulling you towards, which is, I guess you could argue, is close to like a nearly unrealistic debauchery. And then at some point you start to ask yourself, okay, wait a second, is there any bigger way of looking at this? Is there any bigger picture I could look at this, like about investing in the world, making the world higher standards, making my group, my community, bringing them to a higher standards, understanding my place within this, all these type of things. And this is what I consider when you're starting to hit on the self. These thoughts seem to be what moves you towards, this is who I am, this is what my self is, this is where I fit within the bigger picture. And it's almost like you can imagine people when they start having these thoughts, I found God and God has given me my destiny and my plan. God, the gods in all the religions have possession of destiny. They have possession of your place in destiny. That's always how it was related to. And so you could start to wonder, like, this makes sort of evolutionary psychological sense. That's, as I said, Leonidas sacrifices himself for the group, whereas the other character, the decrepit hunchback, he actually sacrifices the group for sexuality. And that's a sort of like, you're starting to get the seeds of the ways this type of stuff might think. And Jung noticed that when people started thinking these thoughts, when people started believing in the future again, when people started believing in the big picture, when they maybe moved their souls up above just blunt instinct and started to see that blunt instinct was contextualized within a bigger picture and kind of make them all work together, they started to naturally draw mandalas and naturally think of things like children, for example. And so it seems like, I guess what he meant by that archetype, in my understanding, would be that when you start hitting on that experience, and I guess going into this, anybody who's interested in Jung, I would abhor them to not get too caught up in the intellectual side of it and just simply look for those experiences I was just describing throughout this and try to have those, because, you know, facing your deception is going to bring you a lot further than figuring out if the shadow is like a USB cable stuck inside the back of your head, or if it's like some astral heaven or some sort. And the same with the Animus and the Anima. So that is my complete thoughts on that, sir.
Perfect. I have one more big question. It might be the best question. What is meaning, and how do we achieve it?
So I would put it back to what I was saying with the self thing. I would suggest that it's about big picture thinking, and like, all right, like, okay, I'm me, and that's great, and my will to life wants me to do this, but what about like their history? Like, what the fuck is history, and where do I fit within that, and what's happening? Like, I'm part of some massive story where right now we're trying to globalize the world, for example, and like, where do I fit within that? Like, what does that mean? Is that a good thing? Should I go hardcore anti-globalist? Should I go all in and globalist and make sure it happens correctly? How do we figure all this stuff out? Where do I fit within this? What's my purpose? Am I just some artist that should go in the corner and just produce high quality work? Will that save more souls than me becoming a politician? These type of things. These are big pictures. And so in terms of meaning, I think the best answer is actually, you got to earn meaning. That's something that you start to, you don't just like figure out. Like when you face your shadow and you tame your animus or anima or something like that, when you achieve these things, it opens up the ability for you to have a more meaningful life. And I think that's a frame that not enough people go into with this stuff. They're like, I'm trying to find meaning. It's like, you're a lazy bastard who's not like investing in yourself at all and not really overcoming any difficulties. What the fuck says you should have a meaningful life? Most people's lives are.
You think it takes effort, yeah?
I think so. I think it's like levels. You have to open it up, and you know, like the meaning of a Roman emperor, an elite politician. The meaning of their decisions is so much grander than like a guy who's addicted to alcohol in the pub. It's not that the guy who's addicted to alcohol is irrelevant. Like, he can change a lot of stuff. His conquest of alcohol could save 1,000 souls if he writes a book about it. But he has to conquer the alcohol and write the book, and that's his path to something more meaningful.
What do
And
you
it's the
say to
same.
someone? Do you want to go ahead?
No, go on.
What would you say to someone who's like, I'm looking for something to do. I just can't find anything I'm passionate about. I just, no matter where I look, I'm struggling. Like, I know someone who is like that, and they've been like that for years. They're just like, I don't like this. I don't like anything. I just want to sit at home, you know, on my computer and jerk off to Megan Fox.
Well, not a bad idea, but
It's not a bad idea, no. I think I might do that after this ends in a few minutes.
This is always an interesting question. Like it is that I would prescribe hardship, like do tough stuff. I know that usually with these people they have a inbuilt nihilism. They don't believe that anything in the world is worth meaning. And look, like I've sort of a harsh approach about this, but it's like if you believe the world is meaningless and pointless and you're just going to kind of bow out of the game, you're going to get precisely what you deserve. Like you're going to cycle down into the hollow, empty place where organisms go to die and always have throughout history. And it's like it's like the shadow thing. You can deny the game, the reality as much as you want, but it's going to go on without you because it's bigger than you and better than you. And what you're doing is going to hurt. And like you obviously don't want that, and you can keep comforting yourself, but eventually like death will come, eventually regret will come. These demons, the shadow, if you will, like they're always there, they're waiting for you. You don't get to escape them. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is that people think that they can escape reality, they can escape the finality of you are going to die. You are going to, before you die, you're going to think about why you lived. You're going to realize, you don't know now because you're too stupid and small-minded, but you're going to realize that this was literally your only chance to live. This is your big opportunity and you wasted it. And if you reject all those realities, if you don't face them, if you have the arrogance to think that you're better than those realities, there's nothing I can give you other than the warning that you will be punished, and it will be too late by the time you realize. It's almost like I don't know if you ever tried psychedelics, but when you start tripping, it's like when it starts happening, you sort of realize you're like, oh God, there's no going back now. Like I'm all in now at this point. And if it's going to be a bad trip, you're going to get, and you know it was your fault because, for example, maybe the 2 months before that, you had some negative thoughts that you weren't dealing with. The punishment is just going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. But if you've been taking care of yourself, it's going to be a good trip. It's sort of like that. And I would say that would be the shadow for most of those dudes is actually escapism and denialism and arrogance. And I know a lot of people don't say it that way, and that can be very, very harsh, but it does seem to come across like that. And they're not willing to, just take simple things and get simple wins, like, I don't know, like hitting the gym or something like that, and just saying, right, I'll get progress somehow. So I don't know, is that a comprehensive answer?
No, that's fine. Yeah, that's good.
Right, my man, I got to bounce, I'm afraid.
You got to bounce. We have to thank Steafan for coming on the podcast. If you want, head over to his channel, Uberboyo. Where else can they find you?
You can find me on Uberboyo on YouTube, Uberboyo on Instagram, Steph on Twitter, Steafboyo on Twitter, @Steafboyo on Twitter. And the Boyoversity should be opening up soon. So if you're interested in checking that out, that's also there as well. But I recommend you check out Uberboyo, the channel. Give us now a follow on Instagram. I'll see if I can post.
I'll leave your details in the description if I'm bothered. We'll see. Right. Steafan, thanks for coming on the podcast. Thank you so much.
You're a star, AJ. Thank you very much, sir.